Uh, all right, morning, guys. So this is UBA Q1 2026 earnings report. So we are going to break it down in this short as possible, less than 2 minutes. We're done. So you look at it very well, read the headline, but we tell you the stories behind the figure. So if you go to the income statement side of things, you see that the gross earnings increased, then operating profit also increased as against compared to last year. But one thing that dropped was profit after tax. Why? So we are going to dive into it. Then if you look at some things are looking up, if you compare it, which we have done, you go back and compare it. Then on the side of things are getting better. If you look up, then if you look at the key ratios too, if you look at the key ratios, you see that the cost to income is also heading up a little bit. Then the profit after tax, if you overlay it with the gross earning, it's a kind of, it dropped a little bit. But the two things that look so positive from here is the revenue, that's net income. You have to know that banks make profit from two ways: net uh, income or non-income interest and interest income. So the two of them increased significantly. Then if you look at the balance sheet too, the balance sheet overlay, it also looks pretty good. Even the financial leverage is looking pretty nice. Then if you look at the assets and the equity side of things too, if you compare it with last year, the equity added up a little bit, then the asset also grew. Okay, the asset declined slightly. So this is it. But the some interesting thing to know that operation went up very well. Profit, it kind of failed because cost. That is what you saw in that cost to earning. So cost was heading up a little bit. Then in Ghana, Ghana has exited hyperinflation. So the reserve they used to make for hyperinflation is no more, which is positive for the business side of things. Then the subsidiaries are growing too. That is why the non-controlling interest profit that the subsidiary has is also heading up. Then loan commitment is growing so much, which if they recover it is very good for them. Then their litigation case went down significantly. Litigation now went down significantly. Then there is a dilution. That's why you are seeing the EPS coming down. Then the Naira is also strengthening. So that is it about UBA Q1 2026.